I want to welcome Shubha Sarma, author of the Awasthis of Aamnagari, which Niyogi Books and Purple Pencil Project have been reading along for the last few days. I am Prakriti Manyar, the editor and co-founder at Purple Pencil Project, and I want to start by saying I thoroughly enjoyed the book. More so because now I'm away. I've been away from home for 2 years, and the nostalgia is even more powerful. So it was very serendipitous for me to be reading about these past summers, family bickerings, and things like that. So thank you for that. It's a very, very special read. I want to start. It's a bit of a cliche start, but how did you decide to write about family and this sort of nostalgic summers past sort of topic? Also, because the first book was a collection of short stories. So, what was and it was 7 years ago. So, do you want to walk us through how did you come to write this book?
So, it's very interesting. A lot of people think that the book has been written immediately before it comes out in the market,
Yeah.
when in reality, the book was written between 2015 and 2017. And for 2 years, either I was looking for a publisher who would be enthused enough by the book to publish it, or once Nyogi Books did decide to take it on board, then the edits and the corrections back and forth from their editors, my perspectives. So it is a very long and laborious process actually to come out with a book. So the book was not written too far away from my last publication.
Okay.
And what happens is that since I do book writing, I do writing as an aside from my professional life, and it is a very demanding activity on its own. After my last book and all the promotions that were involved around it, and all the writing and the blogs and the reviews and all that, I decided to take a break and do more writing for at least a year. And I thought I'd just read up and catch up on my own reading or spend time doing something else that I enjoyed as much. So I actually started writing only sometime in 2014 end or 15 beginning. And that's when this book came about. And very interestingly, it was not a conscious decision to write about the family or the joint family as a theme. I just wanted to write something that made me happy. And like you, I was far away from home and I was missing home and missing those small things which make life extra special when you are at home. And so when I started writing, I very naturally wrote about home and about family. And that is how this book came about. It's a very selfish piece of work in which, more than the reader, I did it for my own self to begin with.
That makes it even more special, I feel. And earlier you mentioned this taking this break from writing and reading widely. I'm just curious, did what you read influence these things? How you wrote the things you wrote about or the characters that eventually sketched out in your stories?
I wouldn't be able to say yes or no very categorically because it's a very subconscious absorption that happens when you read a book.
Yeah.
And I have not what should I say, very obviously taken inspiration from any book or any character.
Okay.
But perhaps somewhere that I have read up, whatever I've read has come out in this. One thing that I did pick up consciously was that I read a lot of P.D. James in the last few years. She writes mystery thrillers. And the beauty of her writing is that she uses extremely good English in a very uh, a non-obtrusive manner. So, you have these big, heavy words which make you reach out for a dictionary, but they are so beautifully woven in the language that it doesn't appear like a conscious effort that she's making. And I found that absolutely mesmerizing because, my first book, I had deliberately kept the language very simple and flowing. But I was so struck by P.D. James' writing and this one aspect where you can use good language, but use it in a very non obtrusive fashion and a non intrusive fashion so that it just flows along.
That what you're mentioning is, I feel, really so apt also as for us as Indians, and I speak this as a person who's tried to write in the past, just to be able to use English like that, with this dance between simple and more slightly more nuanced and descriptive language. It's just so interesting, that journey itself, and I'm so glad you pointed that out too. But coming to the book, why Amnagari? I mean, for I know all summers, at least my Indian summers have been full of mangoes, full of the exchange of mangoes is such a socio-political affair also between, like, oh, did that family get it, was a box sent to this family? But I'm curious, which is why I'm doubly curious to know why Amnagari.
The original title of the book was Pandit Ji's Haveli,
Hmm.
because for me the house itself had a life of its own, and it was the central character around which all these different lives revolved. But as I completed the book, somehow I felt that the Haveli had lost that central position that I had started out with,
Hmm.
and what had overtaken it was this family, and which is why a lot of readers talk about the family and the joint family.
Hmm.
And I had somehow just given the name the Avasthis to start with, and then I needed something which matched it, and there was a lyrical quality to the name the Avasthis of Aamnagari.
Yeah.
And then, the whole thing about how mangoes can be used as a metaphor for the family, because it's not a very clean or a very clinical fruit. It's an extremely absorbing fruit. You can't have it without either, you have very strong emotions about it. Most people love it, but some people are repulsed by the messiness of it. So I felt that it was a very apt metaphor for the family, and that is how the Avasthis of Amnagari, and it sounded very catchy. So yeah, that's how it came
Yeah,
about.
absolutely sounds very catchy. Even before I sort of stumbled into actually reading it, it was on my wish list simply for the name and the very, very beautiful cover. I have to give credits to that.
Yes,
Um,
I think Yogi has done a tremendous
yeah,
job on that.
they really have. Um, Continuing with this, and this is something just comes from a personal curiosity. I love how personal experiences weave into stories, even if subconsciously. Which is why, again, slightly personal question: is it? Did you have a lot of experiences as a joint family, or was this something you had to rely on observations and research to learn about the dynamics or how many people living together function? And how much is real? I want to say, and how much is the creative freedom?
So some of it is definitely real. It flows from personal experiences because I grew up in a similar sprawling kind of a house with a lot of people living in it, lot of pets, lot of people around you in general. But apart from that, for me in this family, I have tried to bring in the elements of the world. So it's not only the family, it's actually a world inside that book where you have the good, the bad, the medium, the ugly. You have negotiations, you have relationships, you have power relationships, you have positions of hierarchy and subservience. So to me, the family is the universe in this book. And definitely, some elements are very autobiographical, but a lot of it is picked up and a lot of it is imagination.
Did you have anyone calling you secretly saying, "Hey, I didn't think you were going to write about me 20 years after we had this particular talk"?
Yeah, I actually sent a post to all my extended family members in a WhatsApp message saying, please don't take offense if you think some character looks like you. It's creative freedom. So just forgive me, and hopefully half of them won't read it. So it's okay.
Oh, fingers crossed on that one. Um, but I mean, I feel like I absolutely agree with you, where the family is really the microcosm of much larger society, and it's so reflective, which is, and one thing I've often found in family dramas is that there is always that risk of upholding stereotypes while also trying to be authentic. Was this something you were struggling with as you wrote and reworked through your drafts for Avasthis of Amnagari?
I don't think I'm a very thinking kind of a writer. I am more of an impulsive writer I don't overanalyze what I'm writing, and I don't think too much on how somebody would interpret it or how somebody would read it. I am naive and ignorant enough to, just go ahead and write it and let people interpret it in whatever way they want. So there was no conscious move at all to keep stereotypes out or to bring stereotypes in. I just wrote what came naturally in the flow.
I see. Because, and this is just as a note, also for readers or for people who are joining us who may not necessarily have read it, is there are these very interesting ways in which you expect something like this role of the Guruji, which is very common in Indian households. There are a lot of these spiritual leaders. I mean, to each their own beliefs, but you also brought a lot of like realness to it. Well, yes, there is this trope, but this particular Guruji, and there'll be a scene. It's not a spoiler, I think, so I'm going to go ahead and then describe it. Is where the Guruji himself is like, people just assume I have supernatural powers. I'm just a very observant person, which I thought was it was so refreshing, because every time I've seen this particular trope, it's always been this dramatic, over the top, mumbo jumbo mentioning Babaji. So I liked those refreshing twists, not twists, but I thought they were consciously put. But you answered my question there. I'm gonna move on. Pull up my sort of, yeah. I Speaking of tropes, there was the cutest character and the cutest scene was when the animal assembly gets together to avoid the banyan tree being cut down. And Tota, Trisha and I were discussing how Tota was such an amazing character. Uh, what was the character you had most fun writing about? I mean, I enjoyed reading them all, right? Like the gossips, the kitchen help gossiping, and having their beliefs and imposing them on the household. But which was the character you had most fun writing about?
If I look at the entire novel, one character that stands out for me is Mataji. Because, and I've said this earlier, when I started writing, I had a very clear image in my mind that she was going to be the villainous mother-in-law who was going to torture and oppress her pretty little daughters-in-laws. And I'm myself surprised that by the time I was halfway through the draft, she had become very pleasant and very lovable. And in fact, towards the end, all the sympathy and all the affection is for her. So she is a character whom I think subconsciously I really enjoyed fleshing out and bringing all these different dimensions and these different shades to her personality. But in terms of the fun element, there is this house help called Chedi Lal. And there is a story in which the eggs they buy eggs and the eggs are stocked in the refrigerator, and every time somebody picks up an egg to make an omelette, it's hollow. So Chedi Lal and the way he behaves, and he's preening like a peacock because he's got all the attention, and he oscillates between fear at being scolded and the triumph that I am the main person in this whole drama and this episode. So I enjoyed writing his fun parts, and in the same no, in a different chapter, there's this courtroom drama which happens, in which again the retainers don't seem to understand that there is a procedure in which the court has to take place. So when they are asked to take an oath and swear that they will say nothing but the truth, the cook takes offense and she says, "If you think I'm going to lie, then why are you asking me these questions?" In inserting those little humorous tones gave me a lot of fun, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, I was just about to mention the courtroom drama is my second favorite chapter. I was like, this is fun. I would want to have a family or a situation where I'm just like mock presenting my defending myself, or sort of arguing against something. But and I hadn't planned on this, but you mentioned character. I mean, we were talking about characters and writing characters, right? And there are so many, and this is a rather shortish book. It's not a big tome. It's not an omnibus. Are there characters you wish you could have had the space to flesh out more?
I had actually planned to write two or three more chapters in the book initially. But after 2 years, I just started getting impatient, and I thought, let me now get this to some publisher's desk and see what they say about it. Otherwise, yes, I did intend originally, and now the feedback that I get from a lot of readers is that they feel that the book should have had maybe a couple of more chapters. They are left wanting a little more. So I don't know. I sometimes think maybe I made a mistake. I should have just been patient and put in some more. But I was really getting very impatient to see this, and it's been a long time since my first book. So yeah, that's what happened.
Absolutely, yeah, we would have loved it. At least I can say for myself, I would have loved to see a couple of more reimaginings. Also because it's so interesting. I'm sure like every part of India has a different version of the summer family story, right? Like it's similar in its essence, but there are these small details and there is these episodes which will differ, which makes it just different enough yet relatable enough to really enjoy and keep wanting more. So I think it's a really sweet spot in terms of the theme and the way the drama plays out. You mentioned you used the word episodes a lot in this previous answer, right? And which is interesting because even though it's a novel, it does read like a series of short stories just weaved together. And it becomes more a novel towards the end. In the beginning, it's a lot of these episodes that are happening in a family. Um, and I have to like your previous book was also a collection of short stories. Is that just something a form that you really enjoy or more comfortable with? Or it's not so much plot driven, I want to say, as it is episode driven. So do you want to speak to a little bit about that style of writing, the genre of writing?
Yeah, in fact, you're one of the few people who's noticed that, and that is a chink in my armor, frankly speaking, because I write short stories, A, because I like writing short stories, but B, also because it's easier for me in terms of time. I write them in 2 or 3 sittings, maybe over a period of 1 month or so. And so the characters are still fresh in my mind, the situations and the plot that I'm planning to create is very fresh in my mind, and it stays like that. So after the first book, I wanted to try my hand at a novel, and this is what I started with, and I made that elaborate family tree, and planned out things in my mind, and I just never got around to having the time to write it. And the thing is that if you want to write a novel where you pick up from when the previous chapter ends and you drop the thread to where the next chapter is going to start, then you need to write a lot, and you need to fill in a lot of gaps. I didn't have the time to do that. So I thought of a different strategy in which, let the reader fill in the gaps for themselves in whatever way they want. So each episode can be read as a standalone story, but there is a thread of continuity which if you read them in a sequence, it makes better sense. But even if you read it in a random manner, you can still get the hang of it, maybe a little here and there. So that the main issue for me was managing my time and finding time to do it. But I thought it would be also an interesting way of presenting a novel, like instead of writing a tome where you are literally spelling out every situation, and the curtain closes on the first chapter and it opens on the second chapter in a very related manner. I don't think I can do that. It's very difficult for me to do that. It's just too much of writing involved in it, and some of it can get very boring. I didn't want it to be a boring book, so that's the
Yeah.
case.
That's a yeah, it could have, I don't know, maybe that's a possibility. But you mentioned writing, managing time. You also are, of course, you have a full-fledged professional life. And I know a lot of our followers are writers, aspiring writers, right? I think all readers are somewhere like want to also have their own story said in some form, some way of expressing it. uh, can you speak a little bit about like just this kind of time management, a routine that you follow, or like the approach you took to to writing while also managing a professional career?
It is very, very, very difficult to say the least, because apart from your professional career, you have a full time job at home as a mother or as a wife or as a daughter. And you have your responsibilities, and though you might look very blah about it, I'm great at time management, that's not a fact. It stresses you out to no end. And all this about finding the perfect balance and work life balance is it doesn't happen. There is no balance, and there's no perfect balance at all. So it's a lot of stress and it's a lot of strain, but you do it because you like it, and you want to do it. And then the way is you find time somewhere. And I do a lot of writing when I'm traveling, because that is the time when I'm on my own, when I'm traveling alone for work, basically. Then I have no distractions, no family around me, and no office breathing down my neck. So, there's time. And instead of watching, a lot of people I see on the plane, they watch movies on their laptops, or so I used to read books earlier, but now I write. So I just carry my notebook and pen, or I carry my laptop along and I write. So I find time only in these episodes of travel. And frankly, because there's been no travel since March due to Corona, I have hardly written anything. So that's the downside of Corona for me. There's been no writing. And I just hope the travel starts very soon, because my writing will start equally soon.
Oh my God, that is, it's the opposite of the question most writers are being asked during this pandemic, right? Everyone, like a lot of articles will be on writers' habits during the Corona times. And here's the opposite thing: you have not written.
I'm surprised, because with no help around for a lot of people, and you're full time working from home or working from office. And believe me, working from home is far more difficult, because office doesn't close at 6. You're available till 10 in the night, and you start early morning working on your computer. So it's, I don't know how people are saying they're going to be able to write in this time. It's an amazing thing if they do manage it.
Yeah, oh my God, yes. Also, like your room begins to feel like your office. So often I just have to come out as like, I feel like I'm stuck in my office 24/7, even when I'm resting. It's just I think it's a mental block now. My desk is set up and everything is in a very work form, not like a casual room form.
True,
But
true.
yeah, I totally get that. I'm I'm really curious. You said notebook and pen. Do you still write longhand?
I like to. You know what happens is that I write longhand, and then when I type it in my laptop, the story changes, because there's a time gap between when I wrote it and when I finished writing it, and when I type it in my laptop. And I think it's like you're correcting your first draft yourself. So you find a lot of errors, and you find a lot of gaps. So I enjoy writing longhand, and sometimes I type on my laptop if it's a logistics issue. Basically, if you don't have the space to sit and write at a desk, then you just key it in your laptop. But I still enjoy writing longhand
That
with
is
my.
so interesting. No, that is genuinely so interesting because I've had these discussions and I've read a lot about writers' habits, and everyone mentions how like longhand is just a different process of thinking. So your story is different, and you just mentioned right, like your story changes a little bit when you type it out. I'm really fascinated. I tried writing longhand when I first was very committed to being a writer, less committed so now. um, and after the fifth page, I was just so tired. But I could see the difference, the deliberation with which I wrote, because typing I feel is very automatic. I can delete and write.
Yes.
And I don't really make progress. But with those 5 pages, it was like, oh, I made progress. I wrote the full 5 pages without like you tearing the page off and
It's
starting afresh.
also, I think, a generational thing, Prakriti, because I see my own children, they are far more computer friendly, and they're far more comfortable on a digital device, whether it's reading or whether it's writing.
Mhm.
I am somehow still more comfortable with a book, or with, pen
Probably.
and paper.
Yeah, maybe
So,
they don't delete as much. For me, it's just that if the draft doesn't look fine on the Word document, I'm just going to wipe it off. I'm like, nope, start
mm,
afresh.
yeah, yeah,
um,
that's true.
we've spoken a lot about writing, but I'm also very, very interested to know about you as a reader, right? What is it that, um, let's break this down. What are the kind of stories and books that you grew up reading?
I was a complete crime buff. So, from Sherlock Holmes, I think I've read every story or novel that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote, to Agatha Christie. I think I've read all her novels and all her stories. So, I then you graduated to the more advanced kind of thrillers, whether it's John Le Carre or whether it's Robert Ludlum, or, everybody's favorite Jeffrey Archer and all those. So yes, grew up with that. But along with all this pulp fiction, I had a steady flow of classics. I don't know why, but after every two or three fiction, pulp kind of or very light fiction, I would reach out for one of those heavy classics, and I enjoyed them thoroughly. I went through the entire Jane Austen and George Eliot and everybody. So it was great fun, and I think at that time we were very fortunate to have access to good school libraries, which were well stocked with all these classic kind of books, and at the same time we had time. I mean, I don't remember being so overworked with my academics that uh, I didn't have time to read. I had time to read every day, and my books would run out. So, apart from the school library, one had membership of a couple of more libraries because you wanted to read more books, and you could just exchange your library book once a week. I mean, we read everything. We read Hindi. I grew up in the northern part of the country, so Premchand, Sharat Chandra Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, everything. It was such an interesting mix. And then you I mean you read different things at different times. Sometimes you'd be tired of only reading mystery, so you'd switch over to some philosophical kind of a book. But it's just a good mix that kept you busy.
You mentioned you grew up in North India. Are there like Hindi? So, Purple Pencil Project does a lot of like work in trying to have a very Indian only presence. And I know we have a question, but I'm going to just wrap up with one last from my side. Is would you have recommendations of Hindi books and Hindi writers that you really enjoyed? Growing up now doesn't matter. Just some recommendations for our readers and followers to get started.
I think times have changed. When I was growing up, I used to love reading Premchand, Munshi Premchand's short stories and even his novels. But a few years back, I was reading one of those stories to my one of my sons, and I really felt, that that was a different world because here we were talking about money lenders and the oppression of the farmers. Those issues somehow don't seem as socially relevant today. And I mean, these children just could not identify or understand what I was talking about. So they've seen it's a different world. So I think each generation has to discover its own writers and its own reading material. So maybe for my generation, we were good with translations of Tagore and Asha Purna Devi's books translated into Hindi. So that was a very interesting thing for us. But I don't think today's audience is going to be interested in even Asha Purna Devi's stories. They're all about women and how women find their voice in within the family or within the society. I don't know how many girls would identify with that today or want to read that. They perhaps find it in a different time zone completely. So I am not too much up to date with the modern Hindi writers, so I'm not very sure about the latest. But yeah, if somebody is looking for classics, then Man Sarovar, which has a collection of stories by Premchand, is my all-time favorite. It's my go-to comfort book whenever you want to read, and he writes so beautifully. It's amazing the way he writes about these difficult issues in such a pleasant manner and something very depressing, but yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, that's something I see often in Indian fiction, especially regional. Like, there's a lot of struggle, a lot of hardship. It takes a lot of emotional energy to read it. Um, that is true. There's reasons for it. But I could keep going with this conversation, but we do have Mansi's question. And coming back to Avasthis of Amnagari, do you think there is an international audience for this book?
So definitely the Indian diaspora would identify, and I think they would identify very strongly with this feeling of nostalgia and a lost time, because they are definitely in a place where they would miss this Indianness all the more. But that apart, I've had the opportunity to travel to Latin America, to travel to Europe, and I've seen that though Indians like to think that we're the only people who value family and who are very closely bonded, and we have a very weird image of the Western world where they have a lot of independence and they move out and they're no longer attached, etc., etc. It's not like that. I found the Latin Americans, the Italians, even even in countries like France or Germany, families are very closely bonded. And it's a very generalized statement or stereotype that we have in our minds. So when people, even if a non Indian reads this, I think they would be able to identify with the theme and the feelings that are there. Yes, the culture is different, the setting is different, the language is different for a non Indian, but I would say it would make perfect sense.
Yes, I hope that answers the question, Mansi. Well, I don't know if we have any more. One second, I can't see any more questions here. But I think we're also towards the end of our time. Thank you so much, Shubhaji. It was so lovely talking to you. And thank you. I loved reading Avasthis of Aamnagari. It was the book I needed as I was homesick because I was supposed to travel back home in December, but I couldn't, of course. So thank you for writing it. And are you working on anything now? I know you like to take a break between. You said you're not writing anything, but do you have like an idea or a plan of for the next book?
No, I do plan to write, and I'm just waiting, as I said, for the travel to resume so that I can start my writing because the ideas are all there. And yeah, I want to get back to writing very fast. This time I have it very clear in my mind what I want to write, and I hope it comes soon.
I look forward to reading that work
Thank
very
you
soon.
so much. You've been very generous with your words. I'm glad the book made you smile. And I hope you can come back home quickly because there's no place like home.
Yes, there really is not. And you realize that when you can't travel back and forth. I feel
Yeah.
a lot of my friends who used to visit India like twice a year during vacation periods, they're like, huh, America mein settle kar lenge. And now after this year, they're like, maybe not. If I can't travel back home at least twice a year, then maybe this isn't the place. So yeah, there's a lot of this changing of notion for sure. Well, thank you. I think yeah, this is it. I'll be in touch with you otherwise.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
so much.
yeah, thank you to
Bye.
you
Good
too.
night.
Bye bye.